today, so hopefully nothing distracts you from sitting inside in front of our desktop. And I would like to thank you all for joining this evening for this fascinating and inspiring webinar with Reshma Ramachandran, Vice President, Hitachi ABB Power Grids, and earlier Vice President for Digital Transformation and Vice President of Engineering at ABB. And it's a great pleasure to have this meeting today. The topic is quite fascinating nowadays. It's about how to make leadership in digital transformation. And I must admit that can someone mute the voice, because it's okay. Thank you. The role of the host today is to keep the time and also ask the difficult questions. So be prepared for those kind of questions. But I must admit that yesterday we had with Reshma, we had a really good talk, and I got really inspired, and I was really looking forward for today's meeting. And I must say that the next 25 half an hour would be really great experience and inspiring words from Reshma. So Reshma, please tell us about your experience about the leadership in making the business transformations, how to make changes in the big corporations, and what are the factors of success: technology, people, leadership. So please share the experience with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I honestly feel extremely honored to be part of this, and thanks, Pavel, for reaching out and for the invitation. I think it's a small contribution in that sense, to share what I have gone through in terms of transformation and what I see as the leadership traits that would define the future. I'm just going to share my screen with a small PowerPoint, so it's not too many slides. I promise I'm not going to bore you at all with the PowerPoint slides, 300 slides, but it's just so that you know what I'm talking about and there is a background as such. So this is, I think Kasia was very generous in introducing me. This is just a little more than what I am at work at the organization. So I'm actually a very people's person. And as you can see, in 2020 was a year when a lot of what I have done with the people has also been recognized. And this gives me great pleasure, again, in this forum to talk a lot about people and how people are the core of any transformation. It's not just digital, but any transformation. So before we really get into digital transformation or the leadership traits that is required for digital transformation, I just want you to take all of you through the journey of where we started from in history and where we are actually going. So the going is a little uncertain, but in hindsight, everything that we look backwards, we can actually connect. So in the 1900s, if you remember from the history books, it was really the age of manufacturing. And one of the companies that most of us would remember is Ford, which put the assembly lines to manufacture cars in mass production. And why I talk about this manufacturing in specific, or the assembly lines in specific, is because this is also when the workforce kind of became consolidated. So a lot of job titles, if you actually see back then, was supervisor, manager. It was all about control, because when the workers come to the factory, it's about controlling. So I don't know how many of you have done that. There used to be punching cards even for offices. So you have to log in and log out your time when you actually enter an office. All of this came actually from the assembly lines. So it was, and if you actually see, the leadership style was not so much of being a leader, it was actually being a manager or a supervisor, which meant that you needed to make sure the factory workers worked 8 hours of the shift. And this actually changed in the 1960s when it became the age of distribution, which is nothing but supply chain. We all know that, low-cost country sourcing, multiple country sourcing. How do you actually break the value chain? How do you actually take out the cost? This was all about supply chain. So the leadership style that emerged in the age of distribution was a lot around, I would say, analytical ability to say that, how do I break a value chain and how do I look at the cost structure of a value chain, and how do you reduce the cost? And some of the names that is very popular for having done that successfully is Toyota and Walmart, which then again changed into the age of information. This is when, let's say, the internet was born, and you can actually see Amazon, Google, companies like that actually came in. And what happened with the age of information was a lot of automation happened. So the leadership style again changed. It was a lot about knowing about technology. So if you remember, again, when internet came, and probably even today, you know, if you take our grandparents, for example, they don't know how to use computers. They don't know how to use smartphones, some of them at least. And leadership has took a change in that sense to say that, you know, a lot of technological knowledge or technical knowledge was required. So from a cost reduction, it kind of moved into a technical know-how. This again got disrupted, I would say, maybe not 2010, probably 2005 to 2010. This is where the age of customers slowly started emerging. So we are all empowered customers. We know what to buy, and our decision making is influenced a lot by social media these days. So what happened with the age of customers is how is data or information actually used to deliver value to the customer, perceived value again. And I would say around 2017, 2018, and this is what is like the beyond part here, you know, where again leadership has started, the age has started changing, where customers are also becoming producers. So if I just take the energy world that I come from, some of you might already have solar panels in your rooftops. So you're a producer of electricity, but you're also a consumer of electricity. So the customer being also the producer is actually what is going to happen going forward in a lot of things that we are going to see. And again, the leadership is going to change based on that. So two things I want to actually highlight here. If you actually see the timeline from 1900 to 1960, there was like 60 years gap for the change to happen. This kind of halved in 1990, so 30 years. And if you really see 2010, this is where I said, I think it's more like 2005, it again halved, 15 years. So what do you think is going to happen in the beyond? When we put a box there, it's actually going to be like 7 years. This is only going to reduce. So leadership is changing, leadership styles are changing. And finally, Charles Darwin's theory comes into play. It's more about adaptability and speed. One, you need to adapt to the changes, and second is how fast you adapt. This is a good segue into the next part of digital transformation itself. And this is something I want to spend like a minute. When we talk about digital transformations, you know, what is it that comes to your mind when we say digital transformation? It's about the tech part, the IT part, you know, when we remote sensors, IT applications, we think about mobile phones, you know, hardware, software. This is what we think about digital transformation. And this is where a lot of money is required in terms of investment. And if you actually see the current data says there is 1.3 trillion US dollars that is getting invested world over by companies in terms of digital transformation. Now, what is interesting here is what is the other part of digital transformation? That is change. So any organization that is going through a digital transformation has to necessarily change. And one example that most of us are familiar with is Kodak. Kodak was a manufacturer of analog cameras, and you know the story about Kodak. So they kind of, you know, fell off the business when digital cameras came into picture. This is, and why I bring that example is I will use that example in several of the concepts that I would just want to explain. So when it comes to change, it's always about people. It's invariably about people. It's invariably about mindsets. And this is something that is totally underestimated. And I don't want to just pinpoint digital transformations. In any business transformation, the mindset or the people part is something that is underestimated. McKinsey puts the number at 75% when it comes to the failure of business transformations. And it's even more disappointing when we talk about digital transformation. So again, McKinsey puts a number at 89% of digital transformations do not succeed. And I would say the fundamental factor of that failure is because we do not give importance to the biggest pillar, the biggest driver of transformation, which is people. And this this is what I wanted to also just put your thoughts, just awaken your thoughts. When we talk about digital transformations, there are actually 5 key pillars. And you can see that here, technology is just one. So that's like 20%. And take a minute, probably 30 seconds, and think about all the digital transformation roles that you have in your organization. Is that person, or when the job description came, is it more tech oriented or is it more people oriented? And I'm pretty sure that most of us have seen digital transformation jobs getting posted with a lot of technology. You're supposed to know the latest apps. You're supposed to create apps. You're supposed to know what a sensor looks like. You're supposed to know how to connect devices, IT applications. All of this is technology. In the past so many years, and I'm very passionate about this topic, so I've started scanning a lot of job descriptions. And in the past, I would say 3 years, there is only one company, one organization, and one job posting, in fact, which has actually put 50% on the technology side and 50% on the human side of it. And if you really see here, the culture, the governance, the organization structure, the talent and competence, all of this is people. So when 80% of the drivers of digital transformation is people, the question I ask myself is, why don't we focus on people, and why do we just focus on the technology? And this is something that I just wanted to share again in terms of, this is a survey that was done by MIT in terms of the barriers to digital transformation. And again, you can see here, the only 2 barriers here, which is technology oriented, is a lack of technical skills and security concerns. And most of us are aware of this, cybersecurity concerns, data protection concerns. These are genuine concerns that is emerging as we move into I don't want to say transforming organizations, but more as we move into a digital era. But everything else that is required for having a successful digital transformation is around me. And this is the reason why leadership actually plays a huge role. So if you were to take any organization that has successfully delivered transformation, and I just want to talk a bit about Kodak here as to why Kodak's transformation around digital failed. This is totally got to do with the leadership that was there at Kodak at the time, and where they could not actually arrest the competing priorities, which, as you see in the survey, is one of the top barriers to digital transformation. So what happened with Kodak was, and this is probably something that most of us go through in our organization, Kodak was actually a chemical company, so to say, because the films that they produced to take photographs was actually very chemical based. So they had a lot of chemical engineers with them who actually knew, what's the best chemical technology. And this is the same, if I would take my own organization, I would say we have a lot of good electrical engineers. Now, when you are actually moving into a new field, so which is the core is your chemical part, if you are actually moving into a new field, which is actually the digital part, there are 2 things that happens. One is, of course, your competence. And I think this is addressed here in terms of any insufficient skills. And the second is actually prioritization, because you're going to compete for the same resources. So again, take a minute and think about, when your organizations are going through digital transformation, how many resources are actually allocated for the digital part, the digital transformation part. There is a lot of hype around digital transformation. Anytime an organization embarks on the journey, there is a lot of media publicity, there is a lot of financial investment that is done. But when it actually comes to taking away resources from the core, which is basically the bread and butter, this typically does not happen. And this is again where leadership comes into play. And I just want to spend time on the traditional leadership and the new age before we get into what actually is required for success in digital transformation. So when you think about traditional leadership style, and this again, if you remember the first slide that I showed in terms of both manufacturing and supply chain, it is a lot to do with control. And this is why I was asking, when I started my career 20 years back, I used to work for an organization where I had to, it was a digital card. It was not a paper punch-in, but I was a white collar worker, but nonetheless, I had to punch in and punch out. So there was a fixed time. And I don't know how many of you still work in fixed times, 8 o'clock, you go to the office and only 5 o'clock you can leave. And there is a lunch break. This is control. This is completely control. And this has a history. And this is also the reason why I showed the history. When it was manufacturing, when it was about assembly lines, you had to make sure that people are in the workplace and actually are productive. So you had to have control. You had to have hierarchy. Some of the organizations in the 1960s had about 15 layers. So by the time you could actually talk to, if the CEO is like the 15th level, if you wanted to talk to a worker in the factory who would actually tell you how to improve the process, you had to navigate 14 levels, 14 layers. This is not efficient in today's world, right? So a lot of what we see in the traditional style is control, centralized. So think about corporate offices. It is headquartered somewhere, and a lot of decisions are taken in the corporate headquarters. Even if action is happening somewhere else, you have managers, not leaders. So think about job titles at the moment. How many of your managers, how many of you have managers versus leaders? And it's very hierarchical. So can you skip levels? Can you talk to your boss's boss? Or does your boss's boss talk to you? This is all very traditional. I would say in the 90s saw an emergence of the new age, when the age of information started kicking in. There is a flatter structure. So some of the progressive organizations have as low as 4 levels. It's very flat. So it's based on project teams, not necessarily hierarchy. There is a lot of leading positions, which means that you would see the job descriptions or the titles changing from a manager to business leader, for example. And there is a lot of sharing. So IBM is a good example that comes to my mind, where there was a corporate office in the US, but they had a lot of regions. And nonetheless, the regions had a headquarter. So Europe had a headquarter, for example. I think it was in France. I don't remember, but it was in France. But still, nonetheless, the hybrid, the sharing structure started kicking in. This is also where, at least I would say, progressive organizations moved away from control to trust. So trust was a word that was actually being used in leadership. So until then, I would say until the 90s, trust was never in play for leadership. It had to be aggressive. You had to control. You had to be very hierarchical. So trust as a word started kicking in the 90s. Now, what I call as leadership is changing. It's no longer about leadership. It's about influence. How can you influence others? And this is where trust comes into the core of everything. So you can't influence people if they don't trust you. And this is also where we see a lot of organizations where, again, digital transformations are successful. You actually see there is more of partnership. So it's not just within the organization. And I can give you an example. If you read the news, in the past week or so, Microsoft has announced a lot of partnership. And Microsoft was one of those companies which actually went and did a partnership with their competitor, Apple. So partnership requires a lot of trust, especially if you are actually in competing sides. It needs a lot of trust. And influencing also means that you don't have titles anymore. You are just an influencer. And just completely out of the organizational context, how many of you are on LinkedIn and Instagram? And you see influencers there, right? This is the way the world is actually going. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need a title to influence, but you need to generate the trust amongst, and I use in quotes, followers. You need to generate the trust in followers. And this also takes you out of the organization. So it's not just within the organization. You need to build trust within suppliers. You need to build trust within customers, because some of the, and I can tell you about from my own experience, when we developed certain projects which were outside of our comfort zone, we actually developed it with the customer. So this requires a lot of trust. And as we move into the new era, I would say, and as I said, the time is only going to half every time. So if you're talking about 7 years now, it's going to be only 3.5 years before a new leadership style emerges. And that is what I call as the influential. Now, just coming into the next part, which is also something very, I would say, very close to my heart, in the sense that this is also where, traditionally where men were typically looked at as leaders. This is why I intentionally put half woman and half man, because it's not so much about the gender, it's about the feminine traits. So I would not necessarily say it's, women will rule the world. I would love to see women rule the world, but it's more having feminine traits. So and this is also something that I wanted to put it in a more provocative way, digital and future savvy. So as I said, the future is unpredictable. We have to create the future. So if you are not future savvy, if you are not taking decisions for tomorrow, a lot of the transformative work that you do today can fail because you're not thinking about the future. So it has to be adaptable to the future. And this can only come with being curious and innovative. So for those of you who have not read the book, The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck, I strongly recommend that. It actually talks about how do you stay curious? How do you actually have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset? So fixed mindset typically means that you stay with certain skills and you believe that either you have it or not have it, which is also what organizations fall into the same trap as individuals. But you need to stay curious and innovative as a leader. This also makes sure that you have the dexterity, and dexterity is nothing but adaptability. You adapt, and with dexterity or adaptability comes diversity. So it's not diversity of gender, race, education, or any of that. It's actually diversity of thoughts. Because if you want to stay innovative, if you want to come up with the next big thing, if you want to come up with the next Google, the Uber, the Airbnbs, any product that you're developing, if you want it to be the disruptor, you need to have diversity. Because thinking the same way is not going to get you to the next level. So as a leader, it's very important that you stay adaptable. You may not like what you hear. And again, from my own experience, I can tell you certain things that we do the traditional way, it's very difficult when it gets questioned. But this is where diversity helps. And that brings me to the last point of being strategic and empathetic. So strategic is really going back to the future savvy path. You need to think strategically. You need to think, what customers want and create a need and demand for the customers even before they think about it. But at the same time, you need to be empathetic. And empathy is nothing but thinking from the other person's perspective. And it's employees, it is your partners, it is your suppliers, it is your customers. It's all of your stakeholders. You can't exclude one and say, we only think about customers. No, your employees are equally important. So in terms of the traits that actually helps in digital transformation is really thinking about the future, being strategic, being empathetic. And this is why I also think a lot of these traits that we talk about that is required for successfully delivering these transformations is a lot of the feminine traits. So it's not, again, please do not misunderstand me. It's not about having all women, but it's about having those feminine traits of empathy, about diversity, dexterity, just staying curious. I've put together, I think you should all get these slides. So just for those of you who are curious, these are the material that I used for the research to put together this short talk. And some of them are really nice, it's a bedtime read. So before you go to the bed, you can just take a look and read. Nothing, I would say, no rocket science, but most of the things simple. That brings me to the end, and I will leave Kasia to ask me all the difficult questions.
Maybe I will be the last one because we have also the panelists here as well. I just wanted to ask our guests right now if they have questions, and then we also have a question asked by our attendees, but they are written, so I will read it after that. But firstly, I will ask our panelists, do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Okay, so maybe I will start. Okay,
I think the best transformation starts with bottom-up approach. So it is a great idea to answer to this questions from attendees.
Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll read all of them, and please, Reshma, please give your opinion, your answer for those questions from the attendees. Let me start from the last one. A new way of recruiting leaders, influencer and successful members of important projects. How to recruit the leaders?
Yeah, I think one of the things that in my view, we are again stuck at the manufacturing age is to take a job description and write everything that is possible in that job. So a lot, and many times when we write the job description, we actually think about doing the part. And I think this is where we need to be a little detached and say, as a leader, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to do everything. You need to bring people together to collaborate and make everyone deliver their best. So in recruiting, what I would say is it first starts with the job description. So start asking yourself, do I really want this person who will lead the team to know everything? So just to give an example, if you are actually recruiting for a team leader for connected devices, do you actually expect the person to know the coding to connect the devices? And I think this is a mistake we make. We think that the person should know so that he or she can lead. But in my view, you need to understand the basics. You don't necessarily need to know how a code is written, what should be the right code, what should be the perfect code. And this is what makes you a manager, not a leader. Then you tend to get into the controlling part. So again, recruiting starts with the job description. So I would say start from there as to what is it that you expect to see in these leaders. Instead of focusing a lot on the technical skills, focus on the soft skills. Ask them in an interview, how have you led people? How have you brought their strengths? Managers focus on weakness, leaders focus on strengths. So talk about that. What are the strengths you see in the people? What are the weaknesses you see? And this kind of filters it
out. Okay. The other questions that we have is how to force management level to behave like a partners instead of being like lieutenants in the army. How to explain them they should change their attitude? Or maybe I will add something to this question. If they really should be the leaders or managers of these companies.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I have learned through experience is that everyone has something in it for them. So when it comes to, let's say, the management team, where you're right, most of the times they act as referees or lieutenants, saying, I have the power to ask questions, or I'm the kind of the gatekeeper. And I think it's more about giving them what they want. So always remember that they're also answerable to someone. As is with most of us, we are always, even the CEO is answerable to the shareholders. So what is it that they need to back off, so to say, is what you need to focus on. So it's a question of the balance. And I think there is no silver bullet for that. If you actually start giving the management what they need, they kind of back off. That's one way to do it. And I would say the second way to do it is, this again comes back to the leadership. If the top leadership truly believes in that. And I can tell you the number of business cases I've written in my life. And if you were to go and take a look at all the business cases, how many of them eventually lived up to that business case you see on a spreadsheet is minimal. So this is where the priority setting from the leadership comes. And if the top leaders don't believe in it, there is very less you as a team can actually do to influence the management. You can circumvent that. This is why I said at the beginning that you can actually give them what they want, so they back off and allow you to innovate, allow you to work on the stuff that you would like to work without being, without having someone breathe down your neck. But if the top leadership commitment is absolutely required, otherwise it becomes kind of a gatekeeper.
Jakub asked the question that from his experience, Polish industrial companies are mostly very traditional, organization-wise. Transformation of people's mindset is challenging and time-consuming. Is it possible to approach both transformation simultaneously? How to approach this topic?
I think organizations, I always say these organizations are a reflection of the society. So if the society is very traditional, it's very difficult to expect that you will walk into an office and you will change, unless you're working for an organization which has a strong organizational culture. In my experience, I've seen very few such organizations. So if you want to simultaneously work on the transformation and people, it's not a question of simultaneous. And this is why I was saying, one is like really the the transformation piece, where you working on business model innovations, new products, sensors, connected devices, cloud computing, all of that. But can you really do it without changing the mindset of people? So I think it's a balanced energy and effort you have to put into both. One is to convince people, keep telling them what the purpose is, what is the why, where are you starting and why are you starting that? So a lot of communication, and I can tell you, it's not only in digital transformation, in business transformations, there is no over communication. You communicate, you take questions, and you keep moving. So it's not a question of, can you do it simultaneously? I think you have to do it simultaneously. You have to create that balance.
Thank you. I got a nice question, and transformation or change? How do you distinguish these two, if any?
Transformation, okay, from a pure, how should I say, language point of view, transformation is something that is positive. Change is something people always associate with negative. We don't like to change, we like to transform. Think about weight loss. That's always associated with transformation. So transformation and change, in my view, are two different things, in the sense that change leads to transformation. So you are transforming to be something better, either as an organization or as an individual. But you need to make those changes. Those changes can be painful. See, it's like the butterfly, right? It's a famous example. Butterfly is beautiful. Who doesn't want to be a butterfly? You tell the caterpillar, you have to go through this. You have to be in this cocoon. You have to be in this dark place. That's change. That's very hard to do. And this is why a lot of us don't turn out to be butterflies, right? Because the change part is hard.
Okay, thank you. And now maybe our panelists could ask the questions.
Okay, Anna Soldaty.
Yeah, please.
Okay, maybe Anna now. Okay. Anna, you?
I represent the Technical University in Poland, one of the biggest. I'm from a very special area because I'm from Silesian area. It is automotive industry. And well, I totally agree with you that well, in my opinion, the most important thing we have to teach our students is adaptability to changes, because it is the only value we can, in such a rapidly changing world, technologically rapidly changing world, teach students. But I wanted to ask you, because I'm first of all from educational unit, what is, in your opinion, the best way? Because of course we can provide lectures, yes, we can organize seminars, even lectures like lecture with you. We can invite you. It would be an honor to invite you to our university to give such speech for our students. But well, I think that the most important thing for students is experience, own experience. So, for example, at my faculty, currently I'm the dean of the faculty. So at my faculty, I have a lot of scientific associations for students and different, projects or something like that, project-based learning. And we observed after 1-2 years that these students, they are different. We have also dual studies and they are also different. What is the best way of teaching students to modern, I would say, management or leadership, better say, for students simply? Yeah.
I think the best management teacher is experience, and I think you said it right. I think it's more a question of giving that experience and exposure. And I just make the difference between what is experience and exposure. Experience is you go through something. Mm-hmm. In order for you to get that experience, you need to have exposure. You need to know that it exists. So I'll just share a very small personal story. I grew up in India. I grew up without power. We didn't have, bulbs, electricity to run the bulbs. And my world was, and I grew up in rural India. I didn't know where Europe existed. So for someone to come and tell me, go and have an experience in Europe would have been very stupid, because I didn't even know that Europe existed or where in the world was Europe, right? So first part was to have that exposure. So I used to read a lot of books, and a lot of these books, the English books, they were set in UK. So we were also a British colony, so we knew about UK. But for me, that like kind of opened up my mind, saying, okay, this exists. Now, how do I get an experience in this? So I think for students, what is really important is, and I would say generally for all of us, what we don't know, we don't know. We wouldn't even think of getting an experience in. So first step is to expose them to different technologies. What is happening around the world, emerging technologies. There are a lot of startups that are actually working on new things, right? So just that exposure. Then comes the part of experience. Then how do you experience it? So here also I can say 50% would want to experience it, 50% would be scared to experience. So that's another part. How do you manage fear? But I would say the first step is exposure.
Thank you very much. It's very important, and I agree with you also, because I give you an example. We have, it is sometimes for students, it is very difficult to create them something which we can call a real world, yes, to put them in a real problem. We can create this problem, but it is at the university always a little bit artificial. However, we have dual studies, and these students, they work regularly in the industry during studies, and they are different. So yeah, it is definitely true. Thank you very much.
And just to say that, or just to add on that also, both ABB and Hitachi ABB Power Grids has got internship programs. Mm-hmm. So encourage your students to also apply for those, so that they get a real corporate world experience. Mm-hmm. And experience it firsthand, right? What does it mean by leadership? What does it mean by collaboration? What does it mean by working in a team? So you're right, academics is very different from, let's say, the corporate world, and internships are a great way to experience that.
Thank you.
Andrzej, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Our platform is trying to help companies in digital transformation. And key activities is creating awareness of and understanding of new generation of industry. We are trying to build a network of so-called apostles. It means influencer apostles who will transfer this concept to companies, to staff. And one of the key points you told is trust, and this influencer should, of course, should have vision, and this vision should be transferred to people. But how to help him to be convinced that his vision is reality? It means transformation is leading people to completely new situation, to completely new surrounding. So such influencer should be really convinced that what is he talking, it will be reality, that people will believe him. How to help such apostles, such influencer in confirmation that vision is true?
Yeah, I think the first thing here I would say is, and this is human psychology, we always think about how do we convince someone about a product. So what do salespeople do? They come and try and convince us about a product. And I think this is where leaders need to think differently. We have to convince people not about what we are trying to achieve, the problems that we are trying to solve. So, for me, one of the things that I feel very, very deeply, passionately is about, as I said, I grew up without power. So anytime anybody comes and tells me that, my village in India, I come from the rural part, or parts like where I grew up would get power. Let's take battery energy storage system. This is one of the, I would say, revolutionary products, so to say. I would not invest in a battery energy storage product. I would invest in the solution that would bring power to communities like mine. So I think it's a little stepping away and say, I'm not trying to convince anyone or the organization about the solution, as in the product or the concept or the technology. I'm trying to convince the people in my organization about the problem that we are going to solve for the world, for our customers.
Okay.
That's one.
Okay.
And I should say, trust, you touched upon something very close to my heart as well. I know it's close to Kasia's heart as well. I think trust comes a lot from credibility. You know, ask yourself, who are the people you trust? Right? In your own world, who are the people you trust? In your family, be it your society, who are the people you trust? You trust those people whose actions and word matches. If I would tell you, you know, I will help you, and tomorrow, or after this webinar, you drop me a note saying, you know, I need help, and I say no, would you trust me? Clearly not. So my action and words have a gap. And I think leaders are, the trustworthy leaders are the ones whose actions and words match. So we watch, you know, it's the same with children. We watch, and our subconscious mind starts registering. So I think for leaders, it's very important. It's tough. It's really tough, I can tell you. Being a small team leader, I would say, it's really tough to live by the words that you say. So you have to be extremely careful what you're saying. So I don't mean inaction in that sense, don't say anything, so don't do anything. But you really need to set that example. That's the only way you win the trust of the people.
We actually, yesterday, we talked about the trust, and we had the conclusion that trust your people, they will astonish you. So we really feel the same feeling that with trust in the team, you can achieve much more. Okay, but maybe I will ask the question also related to the trust, but how do you approach, or how do you feel, and what are your steps when someone will use your trust and it will disappoint you? What is your approach to this kind of person?
I think, okay, you know, to say that you will never be betrayed in trust is not right. I think you will always, there will be moments in time when your trust is betrayed. I think it's more important to understand why they betrayed the trust. For me, it's a self-reflection as well. It's the same thing you do with your children, right? If your child lies to you, it's not about the child lying. It's also about like self-reflection. So every time my team has abused the trust or betrayed the trust, or not told me something openly, it's also a moment of self-reflection for me. And I'll give you a very good example from COVID. So we have an office in India, which is our operations center. So we have one in Krakow and we have one in Chennai in India. And remote working is not the norm in both the countries, neither in Poland nor in India. You have to come to office. This is a country culture. Right? Mm. And what happened with COVID was everybody was forced to stay at home. So this is where trust comes in, right? So do you trust the people? And team leaders in both locations came and asked me this question: how do we trust the people that they will work? And thanks to COVID, my simple question back was: do you have a choice? You want them to work, right? So trust them. You put that forward, and you won't believe our productivity has gone up. So I think it's not so much about do they betray the trust? It's a question of, are you willing to give the trust? And for me, that always comes first. I've been betrayed several times, just to be clear. But it's more about giving and not letting one incident change your core values. So this is also stereotyping, right? So then we say, okay, everybody will now abuse the trust. I don't think that is fair.
Okay, thank you. I have still some questions from the attendees. We have only 10 minutes, so I will try to make them to ask them quite quickly. I really like this question from Piotr, that he agrees that that it's really important to develop the soft skills in the future leaders, but how to develop the soft skills in the old styles managers? Are they lost?
Yeah, I think awareness. See, the first step, and this is what I was also telling Anna about students in terms of exposure. So for leaders, I would say it's about awareness. So a lot of, and I don't want to call them leaders for a specific reason. If they're unwilling to change their managers, they're not leaders. Leaders are always willing to change. So old school managers, I think it's more about creating an awareness. So here, if you are a direct report, can you create the awareness? There could be consequences. So I would approach with caution, but it's more a question of, their managers creating awareness. So the more awareness you create, I think the more people see that they need to change. Change is always from within. You can't force someone to change unless, and even if you have a consequential or a reward and consequence system for that, it is not a sustainable change. The moment the reward and consequence system goes, people will go back to their old style. So if the change has to be sustainable, it has to really come from within. So I would say the starting step is self-awareness. So create the self-awareness in them.
I like also the question from Krzysztof regarding the communication with people during the digital transformation. The first impression of the people is a fear of losing jobs. What is the role of the digital transformation leader in this in the dialogue?
So I would say it is not just digital transformation. Any transformation, you take a cost reduction transformation in that sense, it's always about the fear of losing job. I think again, this is human psychology. We are insecure about things that we care the most. Like it or not, we all care about our jobs. So it makes us insecure. I think it would not be wise to say that jobs will not be lost, but I think it's important to say that, how can you upskill and reskill? So when we started the journey as well, we had a lot of fear around that part. But I think it's more to say that, this is where the curiosity or the growth mindset comes in. Are you willing to learn? Because if you see, if digital transformations or transformations in general would actually eliminate jobs, the unemployment rate should have gone up around the world. Unemployment rate has not necessarily gone up. What has actually happened is certain kinds of jobs have been eliminated. So now if Google Assistant, it's picking up, right? It's artificially intelligent. I have one at home, it schedules my hairdresser and my nail salon and all of those. So it kind of eliminates the job of an assistant at an office. This is a whole idea. But there could be more jobs that are created. So it's more a question of how many assistants are willing to actually upskill themselves or reskill themselves. So I think this should be the communication, that it's not about, whether the job exists or not. Jobs will exist. And how do you actually prepare for those jobs?
Okay. We have only like 6 minutes left, but I would like to touch one more topic, which is really close to myself. In ABB or Hitachi ABB Power Grids, there is not so many women working. Mostly because it's like engineering technical companies. What would be your advice to young women to grow up the career, and what they should do, or what would be your advice to encourage them to develop their career?
Good question, very close to my heart as well. And I talk completely only about this on October 6th. So those of you who want to join that can also join, but I'll try to make it short in this 5 minutes. So what Kasia said is very right. And I think it's true for a lot of technological companies. There are very few women. And I think the first thing that I would tell young girls is, dare to be different. You will be the only one. As Kasia would also agree with me, like we will be the only ones in the meetings. And, repeatedly, you go for 20 meetings, you're the only woman in the room. So you need to be comfortable with being different. That's one. Second is, don't give up. So you need to be persistent. You will be looked over for promotions. I cannot tell you how many times. There will be roles that is exciting for you, which will not be given to you. This happens again, a countless number of times. The question is, how soon will you give up? A lot of people I know give up very soon. Even before they finished their education, they give up and say, what? I don't want to be part of that. Some give up after childbirth, or most give up after childbirth, because you start doing this cost benefit analysis in your head. Do I have to really put up with so many things at office, or should I spend time with my child or family? And I would say it's not about you. For me, this is one fundamental thing that drives me. It's not about me. It's about all the women. When someone comes and tells me, I am inspired by you, this is the greatest reward I get. because I feel, okay, I have inspired one woman to stay. So I would tell all the young girls out there, thinking, should I or should I not? Do not think only from your perspective. Think from the perspective of all the girls who will come after you. You will be a role model. And it's tough. The journey is tough. It's hard. And as I said, you will be the only one in the meetings. You will be the only one actually, for any time poster girls are required, you will be the only one. But just dare to be different. Just be confident. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to sum up, so today we heard that we shouldn't be afraid of the transformation, and we should take the lead, and everything depends on people, trust, and also a little bit of the technology as well. Thank you very much for all of you for spending this hour with us. Really thank you, Reshma, for your time and sharing with you your experience. Thank you for all the questions. I would like to thank also Agencja Rozwoju Przemysłu, Paweł and Bartosz for organizing these webinars and inviting us for this topic. And I really wish myself and you all to have great leaders that could lead us to make the great things. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, I would like thank you for this wonderful meeting, Reshma. Listening to you, I have no doubt that you are a true leader. What you say is very authentic and comes from your experience. And thank you very much for agreeing to accept our invitation. Kasia, thank you for that you did a wonderful job during this meeting. Thank you. I would like also thank for our special guests, Professor Anna Timofejczuk, Andrzej Soldaty, and Jarosław Bracel. Thank you to all participants of this webinar. And well, see you in the next webinar, WeInnovators Club, in 2 weeks. Our and your guest, Professor William Fisher from EMD Business School. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
I would like to add just one thing. You see that very important for us is diversity, and we are on the way to have all the time half of women and half of men, or something like that. Thank you very much. It was a great webinar.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.